So what is the cost of shame? What is the role that this ugly thing called shame and keeping us, keeping people stuck in their recovery, keeping them from moving forward, understanding shame and how it can keep us from going into those safe spaces the way Christ intended can be important. Understanding it isn't enough, but honoring it and getting underneath the shame and organizing it is key. But today I want to talk about just creating an understanding around how shame plays such a significant role in keeping us stuck. Welcome to Celebrate Recovery Official, a podcast that shares life-change stories, courage, hope, and leadership wisdom, all centered around the Beatitudes of Matthew chapter 5 and the Celebrate Recovery principles, where we learn that the events of life bring hurt. And when we can face that hurt and identify those hang-ups, the negative core beliefs of how we see ourselves, God, and others, and even our circumstances, how that plays into the nasty habits or defenses or protections, so that we can ultimately impact and change the relationships around us, starting with our relationship with God, is so key. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I struggle with drugs and alcohol and perfectionism. My name is Rodney. I'm the Global Field Director with Celebrate Recovery, and it's good to be back with you today. Thanks so much for sharing the podcast wherever you're listening. Love hearing the feedback and love seeing some ideas coming through from you in my inbox. As always, please feel free to email me and in my inbox. And if we don't get to them initially, just know we're storing them away as ideas, and we'll try to get to them as soon as we can. But hopefully you're finding some good value to kind of get you in between, get you through in between your meetings and just in your daily struggling, your daily victories, your daily walking in recovery as we celebrate what God is doing as we walk this journey. But today I want to talk about shame. And shame is not a new topic. It's interesting whether we're talking about anger, or we're talking about food issues or pornography or substance abuse or perfection. Name the issue. Chances are you're going to find shame lingering, and it's kind of at the core. I like to think of shame as kind of this big old bowl of gumbo. If I were to try to take this big old bowl of shame, now no knock on gumbo, I love gumbo, but just go with me in the illustration here. Gumbo has a lot of ingredients. I think shame has a lot of ingredients, and understanding what makes up this bowl of shame. And honestly, you could use this word picture in any emotion, but shame is one of those things that can keep us stuck. And a lot of times, and it feels weird to say this, shame, I think, sometimes can become our go-to strategy as well, to keep us from going to the places we should be going. That's those primary emotions that need to be organized. For example, a real common one, as we don't jump into this conversation, if someone says, "Hey, my heart hurts when you do this," right? We see this in conflict conversations, having hard conversations. Sometimes in the shame, the responder that's on the receiving end of this, instead of leaning into that and, "Gosh, I'm sorry, that makes my heart sad. I hate that I did that to you. Let's see if we can come up with a better strategy," right? Yada, yada, yada. That's much quicker getting to that conversation, but you get the idea. Sometimes the shame, instead of going to that place to kind of catch the other person, I'll see this when I'm working with couples. One of the partners will say, "Yeah, you're right. I suck. I must be the worst husband in the world. I don't even know why I'm given the time of day. I don't even know why you marry," and they totally exit their own selves, and they especially exit the person that they're with. And so shame sometimes can be a strategy because it feels hard to sit in the pain. And so sometimes that shame can be a protection, a strategy that keeps me from feeling what I should be feeling in this space. And oftentimes what I'll tell people in that scenario, if I'm sitting down with a couple people, is, hey, it makes sense that that shame shows up, and we got to organize that. But right before the shame came online, what was happening for your heart? And that's a good question to ask myself when I feel my own shame coming on that takes me out of a conversation, is slow down. Hey, right before that shame tried to take me out, what was I feeling in that space? Sadness, brokenhearted. I felt despair. I felt defeated because I want to get it right with you, and I messed that up. And that hurts my heart to see you hurting and expressing your sadness. And shame wanted to take me out, but I want to lean in and not exit this where I leave you one more time, kind of a thing. So just wanted to make that point about shame, how it can become a strategy. It makes sense why it's there, and it's not that we're trying to use that as a strategy, but when we can be aware of that as a strategy, that can be helpful. But what is shame? Textbook, shame can be defined as an intense feeling of humiliation or distress caused by the perception of having done something wrong or being fundamentally flawed. It often leads to self-criticism and low self-esteem. So this intense feeling of humiliation, and we talk about this in the scriptures when it says there's now no condemnation, right, for those who are in Christ Jesus. Condemnation and conviction are two different things. And I think shame plays into condemnation. If I tried to humiliate you, to condemn you would be a form of humiliation. I'm going to tear you down. That's a form of humiliation. It's not to convict you, it's to condemn you. I want to just stomp on you with my words. And so we do that to ourselves, though. It's almost like this self-humiliation or this distress that's caused, that's happening around me. I've done something wrong, so therefore I must be flawed. Now we're getting into the core beliefs. It's interesting how the shame plays into my mindset. I see myself as a failure rather than I failed. And those are two different things. Even saying that out loud right now as I'm saying it to you, it's hitting my body differently. Saying that out loud, I made a mistake versus I am a mistake. And shame has a way of kind of taking us out in that space. And so this place of humiliation, this perception, I've done something wrong, therefore I must be fundamentally wrong or flawed. And then you see that self-criticism and that low self-worth can start creeping in. So, you've probably heard that with shame and guilt. I feel shame, I feel guilt. Shame is I am wrong versus guilt is I've done something wrong. And guilt can be a good motivator. And I was talking to a brother about this recently, just talking about, is there any value in shame? I think sometimes there is value in shame because, for example, if I did something really drastic and wrong to you, there can be value. I feel shame for what I did. Now, if it takes me backward, then that's not a productive thing. But if it moves me to do something different, remember we talked about emotion from that Latin word modus. It's to move us forward. It's to move us to do something different. And shame can be one of those things to move us to do something different. And so shame is I am bad. Guilt is I've done something bad. But either way, if they move me to do something different, and they don't take me backwards and cause me to exit the moment, then there can be value of that. I think one of those other things that can keep me stuck is just that stigma attached to my condition of my heart, or maybe the addiction. So we kind of internalize this stigma. And that can be connected with my addictions, substance abuse. I'm a drug addict kind of a thing. Or maybe I have some mental health struggles, and I've developed the shame that if I struggle with this, that means that I am defective and I am less than. And that can just reinforce some of those negative self-beliefs and lead to shame. And you can just feel that in your body. I know I can. It just keeps us from going to those places of healing the way Christ wants us to, right? That I can struggle with mental health issues. I can struggle with addiction and still have my identity in Christ and struggle well. Maybe I'm not where I need to be, but I'm not where I want to be, but thank God I'm not where I used to be. And so not making it, internalizing that as I look at the society around me, that I'm comparing myself to others. And so I kind of internalize these messages about my condition. What's your struggle as you're listening? What is your struggle? And have you internalized some kind of a stigma attached to what your struggle is? Maybe it is around a mental health struggle. Maybe it's around some behaviors, some compulsive behaviors that you've developed through your story. Have you internalized this kind of stigma surrounding that condition? Good to be aware of that so that we don't get stuck there. I think one of the things that shame can do that's really costly is it can cause us to isolate and withdraw. If I were going to just put some gasoline on the automobile, what is that drives the automobile of shame? Isolation and withdrawal are one of those things. The gasoline for isolation and withdrawal, I could say it that way, is shame. It drives us to isolate me from the good relationships, and believing these messages. And so I pull myself away. I withdraw from people. I isolate, and that can reduce my access to the support network in Celebrate Recovery, in my small groups, in my sponsor, my accountability, the resources of being in small group, the resources of being in God's Word, reading my devotional, reading my character studies, whatever it is that I do to struggle well in my walk. I start to cut those critical resources out of my life, and I begin to isolate. Now, it's great to have solitude. That's me being intentional to get alone and away from people and be with God. That's different from isolation, because in isolation, God is not in the equation. We're actually shutting out all relationships. We're withdrawing from all relationships. And the gasoline that drives that isolation and withdrawal is shame. Remember, shame is that place of humiliation. I've done something wrong and I am fundamentally flawed. And that self-criticism and low self-worth starts to creep in. So we let that gasoline of shame fuel the isolation and withdrawal. Now we got to get under. We can't just say stop feeling shame. We got to slow down and organize. And we'll talk more about that, kind of some ways to combat the shame. I just want to kind of give you some of those things that can play a role in keeping us stuck through shame. So, but isolation and withdrawal are critical things to be aware of that can keep us stuck. I'm going to take a super quick break right here. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation of understanding the role that shame plays in keeping us from moving forward as Christ intended. Stick with me. I'll be right back. Hey, friend, if you're looking for another meeting, you may not be aware of this. The word's getting out every Wednesday at noon Pacific. 2 p.m. Central, we have an online open share meeting. There's a quick devotional, mini-moni, and then we break up into gender-specific groups. We'd love to have you join us this Wednesday at noon Pacific. Go to celebraterecovery.com to get the link and join us this Wednesday. You won't regret it, and we'll be happy to see you there. CelebrateRecovery.com for more information. Welcome back. So right before the break, I was talking about the kind of that gasoline of isolation and withdrawal, the gasoline of shame, how that fuels that. I think another one is fear of judgment. In this place, shame can kind of convince us, consume us with this place of fear of being judged by others, being judged by God, even that kind of that self-critical, self-contempt, self-judgment. And that can prevent me, if I'm in that place, from seeking help. If you knew what I'm struggling with, you're going to judge me. So I kind of project these thoughts on other people, and it keeps me from seeking help and being honest about my struggle. And then what that does is it actually fuels the shame cycle. Isn't that the irony of that? The enemy convinces us, if anyone sees what you're struggling with, they're going to judge you. God is going to judge you. He's going to condemn you. People are going to judge you. They're going to condemn you. Condemn is the root of shame, right? And so what do? That if I believe I'm going to be judged, then I pull back, and that feeds into some of those other characteristics of isolation and withdrawal. But it can prevent me from seeking help, and then I'm just in this place of misery with my shame. And so, is there a fear of judgment that you're struggling with? Is there something happening that's got you stuck with fear of judgment? If anybody found out, maybe it is a mental health struggle. Maybe it is an addiction. Maybe it's a compulsive behavior. Maybe it's some of those things like perfectionism. Are they going to think I'm silly? It's like, I struggle with perfectionism. What's the big deal with that? Whatever those lies are, codependency, anger that we might be struggling with, will people judge me if they find out that I am struggling with this? So fear of judgment can be one of those things. Man, a big one for me though, and I've found myself dealing with this, is self-sabotage. Whew, that's a big one, because shame can be that gasoline to fuel my self-sabotaging behaviors. And so here's one that can play out, and I think it speaks into that isolation and withdrawal as well, or fear of judgment. Actually, all of these that I'm talking about today, but we can project thoughts on other people, and we'll actually sabotage the relationship. We'll get ahead of it because we have such great fear that things are going to fall apart anyway. When you find out how bad I am, or how ugly I am, or how unlovable, or whatever it is, we can actually get ahead of it to stay in control and sabotage the relationship. So things are going well, and so we will sabotage ourselves, which can mean go relapse on my addiction, or not following through on what I committed to doing. It sounds strange to say that out loud, but we're actually trying to stay in control. And so what we'll do is, you can't say I failed if I'm the one that directed that, even though we still feel like a failure. It feels differently, but you can see how the sick cycle we can fall into, and shame is a gasoline to that self-sabotage. We can feel unworthy. I'm on a good path and things are going well. Maybe because of shame, we feel like we don't deserve that. And so what do? Well, I'm going to stay in control. I'm going to self-sabotage that, and I relapsed again. Things are going well. I don't know how to function in my life when things are going well. And instead of hitting the pause button and slowing that down, we'll self-sabotage just so that we'll fall back into those old ways, because we end up doing the very things that we confirming the things that we're believing, as it ties back to that self-criticism, self-contempt that we can fall into. So, man, self-sabotage is a big one. Do you find yourself self-sabotaging? And how is shame playing a part in that? It's good to be aware of that. I mentioned perfectionism, but earlier, and I just want to bring that one back. Perfectionism, and I would even add unrealistic expectations. If I have an expectation to be perfect in life, boy, we're going to be sorely disappointed when we're not. So it's an unrealistic expectation. That can be one of those costs that with someone struggling with shame, we may have set some unattainable goals for ourselves. I am going to work out 6 hours every day. Now, that might sound appealing to some of you. Sure does not for me. But maybe I have good intentions, but I'm going to spend 3 hours in the Word every day. But then I look at my season of life, and I've got 2 little kids running around. It's like, is that realistic? Are you setting yourself up? And it's just good for failure. It's just good to be aware of that, because when we set those unrealistic expectations, we inevitably will fall short. And guess what? It just reinforces the very shame messages that we've been telling ourselves. So perfectionism, there can probably have some more conversations around this. There is a podcast on this channel you can go back and listen to. But perfectionism and unrealistic expectations, when we're struggling with shame, this can be one of those kind of sidebar things that can creep in, that can get us stuck. Negative self-talk, I've talked about that. We just have this negative self-talk about ourselves, contempt for ourselves. So we're constantly criticizing ourselves. And guys, I've had to really watch this, even with, sometimes I can even hear myself saying something, even in a joking way. I'm such an idiot, right? That doesn't sound like a real big deal, but being aware of how our words matter, and those words, you say them over and over and over to yourself. I mean, just imagine, even if I was joking, if there was a young kid that came into my presence, and every time I said, now everything I'm going to say is just a joke, but I just said, hey, you're such a failure. Just kidding. You're such a loser. You're not enough. You're too fat. You're such a problem child, or whatever the shame messages are saying. Even though I may be kind of joking, oh, I'm such a fat guy kind of thing, I have to be mindful of how I talk to myself, constantly criticizing myself, because here's what happens. It will diminish my confidence, my self-confidence, and my ability to keep moving forward. Be mindful of how shame plays into that. So are you talking negative to yourself these days? Good to be aware of that. I think in shame, as I talk about that bowl of gumbo, and I'm trying to understand, sometimes shame can be the lead foot, and we don't get to what's underneath the shame. And so one of the kind of the things that can rear its head is we'll avoid confronting difficult emotions, avoidance of the important emotions. And that can, this is why addictions or coping mechanisms, numbing agents can pop up. Substance abuse, pornography, whatever, excessive eating, sex, all these strategies, workaholism, people pleasing, all these things, because we're avoiding emotions. Shame can cause us as individuals in recovery to avoid confronting those difficult emotions, and then those unhealthy coping mechanisms begin to pop up. And so it's good to be mindful of that. Is shame, the bowl of gumbo shame, is talking, instead of letting it to be the only ingredient that's being identified. What's underneath the shame, and what is it trying to say? We say this with anger. What's in that needs to be organized? So avoiding those emotions, shame can cause us to avoid those. And then I think the cycle of relapse. I mentioned that earlier just with the self-sabotage, but shame, when we relapse, can be so overwhelming that it can, I've already screwed up. What's the point? And it can discourage us from continuing to work our recovery. And then we just have this, we talk about this, I think it's in Life Sealing Choices, just that despair. We can have, we kind of ruminate on something, we kind of fantasize about it, we act out on it, and then we're in this place of despair. And sometimes to get out of the despair, we'll go right back to the acting out to get ourselves out of the pain. And so that's why it's so important, if you're in a place of relapse, to reach out and invite others into that, so that you don't create this cycle of relapse. You can create a new cycle. If you relapsed, the strategy and the plan is the same. It doesn't change with the relapse. It's the same. I got to take it to God. I got to take it to my community. I got to take it to my sponsor, my accountability partners. Ultimately, we want to learn how we got to the relapse, to learn how that cycle happened. But don't let shame be the overwhelming factor that discourages you to take that next step forward. And then I think just rounding the corner on this conversation, there's a lot more we could talk about this. I think just understanding the impact on the others in my life, it can put a big strain. Shame can put a strain on my relationships, and we can push those loved ones away. I was talking at the beginning of this conversation just about how, somebody's trying to bring their pain forward. Hey, when you said that hurt me, and it made me feel, like you left me and I lost you, and that was a place of despair, whatever. And instead of leaning into that and taking that in, we check out, and shame becomes our strategy. Sometimes shame can put a strain on relationships and push those important loved one relationships that need to be around us away from us. And I think one of those components is fear that they're not going to understand. It kind of pings off of what I was talking about earlier on the judgment. Maybe they're going to judge me. I have a fear of that. And then it leads to greater isolation. And then we're just in this bad cycle. How can I, when I make a mistake and someone around me points out that mistake, stay curious and try to lean into that and not let it take me out? It's such an important thought to kind of take in. I don't want shame to win today. And so these characteristics, these ways that shame plays a role in keeping us stuck are so important to lean into, to understand, not to condemn ourselves, but to convict ourselves, to allow the conviction of, I don't like that. I want to try something new. There is a new strategy that we can follow. And on the next podcast, I'm going to hit the ways that we can combat that shame and move forward to tackle those strategies that shame plays in our life. I hope this is beneficial for you. There's so much more we could talk about in this topic of shame, but hopefully it gives you some fodder to kind of think about and maybe even stay curious. And in the next podcast, we'll kind of tackle some strategies, but identifying it is kind of the key. These are my action tendencies. These are the ways shame plays a part in my life, not to get stuck there, but to move forward, just like we do with any other area of recovery in this journey. Hey, I hope this has been a blessing for you. And as always, we love having you join us. I pray that you will join me next time. Until then, God bless you guys. Have a wonderful week.